Welcome everyone again. I hope you all sign into the call doc. We keep reposting that into chat. If you, like Bob said, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the call doc in the chat. We'll monitor and we'll drop them into the panelists as it is appropriate. And there will be time at the end for Q&A, so you can also hold your questions till then. Again, our topic today is all about orienting researchers to RCD resources. Somebody asked in the chat, what is RCD? Research, Computing, and Data. It's a kind of an all-inclusive. It's research IT. It's cyber infrastructure. It's kind of an all-inclusive term for kind of all the good things that we do. We'd like to start with having the panelists. We've got great panelists. We'd like to have each of them do a little two-minute intro, kind of give their background and kind of their information about where they sit with regard to orienting researchers. So if the panelists are okay, I'll just go kind of alphabetically in line, if that's okay with you guys. So Patrick Clemins from the University of Vermont. Pat, you want to go first?
Yeah, I'm like Claire said, I'm Pat from University of Vermont. I live in Baltimore though currently, and I manage the cyber infrastructure for a large center grant, FSCORE. Some of you probably have FSCORE programs in your state. And so our program is multidisciplinary, focused on water quality in the Lake Champlain Basin. And as part of my small team, we support about 36 researchers or so, from engineering to social science to hydrology to all kinds of things. And so our main focus is on executing that FSCORE grant. And so that's kind of the context that I come from. We don't have a whole lot of our own computing resources, but with some at the university, and then we do allocations at national resources as well. So I'll stop there and you'll learn more about me as the panel wears on.
Perfect, thanks, Pat. Scott Dellinger from the University of Alberta. Scott, you want to go next?
Yeah, so I'm Scott Dellinger. I'm the Director of Research Computing at the University of Alberta. To provide context, since that's outside the US, 40,000 students, top 5 research institution in Canada, over $500 million of research funding every year. I lead a small group of 4 staff members that support roughly 4,000 faculty members and all of their students, graduate students, and postdocs and the like. And I've got a PhD in analytical chemistry from Southern Illinois University, Carbondale. So I'm actually from the US, but have lived in Canada since '94.
Great, thanks, Scott. Kate Harework from the Fred Hutchinson Cancer Research Center.
Hi, folks. My technical title right now is Bioinformatics Training Manager at Fred Hutch. If you're not familiar with our Cancer Research Center, it's a nonprofit research center that you can think of as halfway between academic and industry. It's how it feels. We have about 5,000 employees, including a few hundred folks who are very heavily data and computationally driven. That includes software developers who are embedded in research labs, researchers who are just wanting to use some of the new computational abilities open to us. We're dealing with quite a lot of fluctuation in how data intensive research is supported. So I've been housed with both the scientific computing team, sort of an interdisciplinary science group that generally supports researchers. And most recently, I am housed in shared resources, which is general research support core facilities. My background is heavily influenced by sort of like the non-managed clusters at University of Missouri and Duke, where I was previously located, as well as the tightly controlled resources at Texas Advanced Computing Center, where I was a faculty member for a few years in University of Texas System. So I know I'm kind of the oddball out, but I'm here to share information about a kind of peculiar research, computing, and data group. And I've thought quite a lot about onboarding, which is why I'm very excited about this discussion.
Thanks, Kate. No, not at all. Not an outlier at all. We like the diversity. So thanks very much. I'm sorry. I'm probably not pronouncing this right. Asya?
Yes, that's correct.
Oh, yay. Welcome.
Thank you. Yes, I'm Asya Klar. I am currently at Pomona College, which is in Claremont, California. But I live in downtown LA. And I've been with Pomona for a little over 3 years. They created the high performance computing department, and I'm the director of high performance computing department. I'm also a one-woman team. I don't have staff to manage. I train student workers, and I established this program 2 years ago and hired over 150 of them. I am part of ITS department, which is about 30 people, and I am a part of a smaller group within ITS called RITG, Research and Instructional Technology. When I joined, I was an infrastructure group, and that didn't work because their focus wasn't on researchers, and it was really hard to convince them to talk to researchers and do anything useful for them, so I migrated. There are 48 departments at Pomona College. About 13 engaged with HPC so far. The usual suspects: chemistry, physics, astronomy, math. We have a couple of unusual departments. I should also mention that Pomona College is a 4-year undergraduate school, private liberal arts school. So HPC was very new to them, and I'm still struggling sometimes to explain to people how it can help them. But there are unusual departments like environmental analysis. There's a whole department that is kind of shared with biology. So that's an unusual setup. I'm also heavily engaged with economics, which is not usually represented in high performance computing. And we're doing some really cool projects with topic modeling. Neuroscience is also engaged with us. They have some really cool data sets. I also founded a technology lab for technology exploration because the college is about 1,500 students, and a lot of them in the last several years come from underprivileged backgrounds. So I'm trying to expose them to technology and mentor young women to join IT. A couple of words about my background. This is my first job in academia. I come from the industry. I worked mostly in life sciences and pharma companies and briefly at SpaceX. And I usually build research infrastructures and clean up and document and train other people. And that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you. And last but not least, Paul Weakliem from UC Santa Barbara.
Yeah, I'm Paul from Santa Barbara. And let's see, my background, I was an undergrad at Boston University. I went to grad school at UCLA, and I did theoretical chemistry on the computer. So that's how I got involved in the computer doing calculations. I'm now at a research institute, an interdisciplinary research institute at the UCSB. And one of the big focuses at UCSB is material science, and a lot of the people there are doing computation. So we've had to have a facility for them to do their research anyway. And then we've been lucky enough to land a couple of grants to put in some campus-wide systems. So I'm in kind of the strange position of I directly support the research institute, but I have another foot in the, hey, we're being nice, we're supporting the people outside of science and engineering and materials.
Great, thanks, Paul. So in order to optimize the diversity of our panelists and to get through as many questions as possible, the way we formatted this is we've got a set of questions. You can see them in the call doc. And the panelists have volunteered to verbally answer the questions. So not every question will be verbally answered by every panelist. They've volunteered to answer a select number of questions, and then the others can absolutely go in and add their written answers to any of the questions. And I would invite everybody in the community to answer the questions if you'd like. So let's get started. The first question, please give a short description of your orientation process, how long you've been offering it, and how do you advertise it? Scott, do you want to go first?
Sure. So our orientation is, I guess, multi-factor in a way. We have managed as research computing to squeeze ourselves into the 10 or 15 minutes that IT gets at the new faculty and staff orientation. So that's very brief introduction that, hey, research computing exists to the faculty members. The staff members don't care, and that's fine. I sit on the University Research Policy Committee, which is made up of all the Associate Dean's Research and the VP Research and Innovation Office staff and Associate Vice Presidents and the like. And so I can reach out to those ADRs to push information out so that the faculty members are all aware. We are attempting to get permission to scan the new hires from the database of staff so that we know when new faculty members are hired, because even the VPR office doesn't know when the new researchers are hired, and the first time they experience them is at their initial grant. And then we provide the equivalent of a summer school training in research computing to anyone at the university, and we actually have people from other universities attend. And that is marketed online, and we have our professional IT communications group provide that because they make it look much prettier than I ever would. And we offer that 3 times a year. So we offer iterative training rather than fire hosing them once in May and expecting them to drink or drown. So we encourage them to show up multiple times a year and increment their knowledge as they gain experience.
Great, thanks, Scott. So how long did it take you? Was it hard for you to get in front of the new orientation into that group?
No, because once I understood so I've been in my current position for 5 years. I had other roles. This is my 8th role at the University of Alberta in total. And so I understand the mechanisms of the university really well. And so I was able to get into that fairly easily. So, people get, an orientation to, this is a Google shop, your email is Gmail, but it's not scanned by, people in Mountain View. And then we also say, and there are resources available to you for computation, so don't go off and buy a giant thing and shove it under a desk. And that's about the amount of time we get during that 3-hour orientation to the entire university for new staff and faculty.
Right. Great. Thanks, Scott. If anybody has any questions for Scott, feel free to put them in the call doc or the in chat. Kate, do you want to describe your orientation process?
Sure. So our campus has not been successful at actually getting time during new employee orientation. Part of that is because we have essentially one training a month. This is sort of the business corporate side of feel on our campus, where the intro new employee orientation is only a few hours long. We have been able to get a flyer included in the materials that folks are given when they begin, and that includes specific mention of office hours offered by a few different groups on campus who are appropriate for orienting people. And so in general, people who want a basic overview will come to our office hours. I do this maybe once a month for folks, so it's not heavily used by us. I can talk a little bit later about the other documentation that we include for sort of self-service about orientation. And I can also say that in terms of sort of more hands-on orientation, I do have courses that are in development for both like HPC on-premise and HPC cloud. And that, because we have so many users who have not used resources before, effectively serves as orientation to them.
That's great. Thank you, Kate.
Can I quickly add then, since I'm not on it, but
oh, sure.
We do also give out paperwork to all the new hires, but they get something that's 6 feet tall and they don't look through most of it. And a lot of times we more or less operate on word of mouth, and that maybe works better because we're a small institute. But often I've at least met with some of these potential hires So when they show up, they maybe have forgotten, but they think, oh, there's some person I need to track down again for that. Again, I know I miss a lot of people if I don't happen to meet them or nobody steers them at me. But I've found a lot of times that's more effective than, I mean, I don't know that I've ever had anyone call me from, hey, I saw your name on this piece of paper I got with the hiring documentation. So, but it doesn't scale.
Great, hear you, definitely. Great. Anybody have any questions in this particular one? Let's see. Oh, Marina had a question. She says, Scott, this question's for Scott. The 3 orientations per year provide same or different information?
Slightly different, and that's part of this question B. If we just put a pin in that for a couple seconds.
Sure, and I mean, we don't have to go in, or you can, that's a good segue. So with
Okay.
in orientations, do you have specific times during the year that you offer these? And is there a limit for attendees?
So no limit. We do have specific times. So we started out with our summer school in late April and early May, because that's the beginning of research season, where people, the grad students aren't having to teach labs as often. We decided that aiming a fire hose at the grad students wasn't effective. We were getting way too many tickets and questions that were being covered in the training, and the problem was their retention rate was too low. And so my staff, actually, I shouldn't say we, my staff decided we needed to focus on training. And so we adopted 2 other sessions, one at the beginning of the fall term, late September, early October, after the start of classes, because that's just too hectic. And then another one in late January, early February at the beginning of winter term. And it does vary. So this gets back to Marina's question. Canada has an annual allocation process. And so we have a specific session on writing your RAC proposal for PIs, principal investigators, that is held in that September, October region or session, because that is when those things are due, and training them other times a year on that particular aspect is meaningless. We sometimes provide more elementary sessions at the beginning of the April, May, because we get new users who, frankly, you know, it used to be that people came in understanding Mac OS or Windows, and now they're understanding iOS and Android and barely understand desktop OSs, and we're throwing them into a command line, you know, Linux cluster environment. So we offer a lot of things based off of HPC carpentry, which is one of the things that we've been working on developing with software carpentries as well. So that's kind of the orientation to how to get work done, how to be effective, and how to be efficient in the use.
That's great, Scott. Thank you. Paul, do you want to answer the question?
Yeah, so we usually do a somewhat formal orientation in the fall when students have showed up, and yeah, after the initial rush of the quarter getting started. And it's usually just a couple hours. The idea is people come and they may not even be sure yet what they want to do, but at least they become familiar with what's available and some of the players involved. And this, let me preface this next statement with, I know the humanities is completely different than the sciences and engineering, but in the sciences and engineering, it's usually, when we're talking about word of mouth again, it's usually the students really doing the heavy lifting in the computing. The faculty are writing grants, they're writing papers, they're running the research group. They're not usually on the system, and there's a few exceptions. So again, you need to get a hold of the students and get them sold. And then a lot of times they'll go back and tell their faculty, hey, there's this group over in such and such a building that's, you know, I can get some computing help from. And then you get the call from the faculty member trying to follow up. So that's another sort of thing I've found with the ground up approach. And again, I know the humanities is very different, where the faculty and the students are kind of this, all essentially running their own little research operation.
So Paul, do you concentrate a lot of your quote advertising at the students since they're kind of ground level and kind of funnel up to
Oh,
the
yeah. So we do have the various contacts of the grad advisors in a lot of the departments, and we have them send out notes. One of the things that we've done back when we could is we would usually do it over lunch, and we'd offer free pizza. So then, anytime you offer students free food, they'll show up. Fortunately, we have a limit on the room. It's like 45, so we're not buying pizza for the whole campus. But that's worked pretty well. And we have started to reach out to, say, people in economics and stuff that we only quasi support, but even we get some of them over there. And then we also try and loop in their IT people to help along the way, so that, because they really can provide better discipline specific help than I can. All I know about economics is I have cash in my wallet or I don't.
So Paul, how have you adjusted that in-person free food enticement to the whole COVID and stay at home?
Well, the one thing, UCSB, probably like a lot of places, shut down completely for research. So we had all these people kicked out of labs. And that actually was we just put together a bunch of Zoom meetings, and often I would enlist a grad student, say from electrical engineering, hey, will you give an hour-long talk about using this numerical software package for designing computer chips and so on. And then you get these smaller groups of people, but then it was very, since it was so specific to what they were doing, it was useful for these people that all of a sudden were lab people and now having to do computation. So that was a big change, and it's worked pretty well. I mean, you sometimes get some students that are great speakers, other times it's a little rough, but I think everyone's been pretty accommodating with the way things have been last year.
Great, thank you. I just want to again point everyone to the call doc. We've got some folks who are contributing answers there as well. On to our next question.
Hey, Claire.
Oh,
before
yes.
we move on quick, I know I wasn't listed to be verbal on this one, but Paul and Scott both hit on something I think is really important. And that is that, I learned pretty quickly that in the orientations, it was easier to say what we did instead of how to do the things that we do. And I think that's because, when they come in, they don't always know what they need. And so I find that the orientations are really good for kind of laying out our menu of options. These are all the things that our group can do for you. And then I usually have a little survey at the end where I kind of gauge interest into what things were more interesting to folks. And we'll have follow-up like lunch and learns for those more in-depth topics. So I think it's important that the orientation is more of a overview of things and not trying to get into depth, because people aren't going to know what they need to know at that point.
I think you bring up a good point. Orientation is different than training. Yeah. All right. Thanks, Pat. That was a good addition. So on to the next question. For informal orientations, are these for individuals or small or large groups? Do you have set agendas on what information you provide? Are you responding to the researchers' questions, immediate needs? Asya, do you want to start?
Sure. Most informal orientations, when they happen, the researcher finds me either through the website or through their department. That departments largely now know I exist. I've helped most of them. So it's usually because they need something specific, and they usually dictate the agenda. And once I learned a little bit better about what they're trying to accomplish, then I have an opportunity to offer other things they may not have thought about. And usually this is not well in advance. Usually it's right when they need it and there's a deadline. It is a combination of helping them with their particular problem and consultation.
Great, thank you. Paul, do you want to go next?
Yeah, again, we operate by and large on an informal structure where it's the student will say, hey, I need help getting going on it. And I'll ask a little bit about what they do. And then they would, again, this was all back when we could meet, but now do some of it over Zoom. And really try and focus on, okay, you need to do this calculation. Here's the steps to do it. Because a lot of times also, my stuff involves high performance computing. And a lot of times people don't even know what they need. So sometimes it's like, well, you don't want to be on a cluster. You just need to find a good workstation in your group, or you need to go talk to somebody about using AWS. So that's certainly part of it, that it's getting them to use the right tool. And that's another thing, maybe coming from research background, I realize this, but researchers just want to, do the research. If it's understanding some fruit fly or whatever it is they're looking at, the computer often, it's just a tool. And, you try and teach them a little bit of some best practices, but most of these people are not computer science majors. They don't want to be. And you have to realize this is just a tool to solve this equation or do something else. So it's how do you help them do that? Plus, put in place some things so that it is best practices and so on. But that's one of the other things. And that's why I get a little information out of them about what is it you want to do or need to do.
Gotcha. Thanks, Paul. Pat, how about you?
Yeah, these are really good points so far. I don't have a whole lot to add, except that I try in these like small groups or, one-on-one kind of orientations to give them at least two options and that's so I can kind of understand their priorities as well. And so, there's usually like a kind of more intensive programming, like high performance kind of option. And then I usually give them a more like lighter, like less intensive programming, but maybe it'll take a little bit longer because you can't use all their resources at once. And that just gives me a sense of like how urgent their need is, what their background is, like what kind of effort they're willing to put into it. And but other than that, what everyone said so far is I think really good. You kind of got to feel like you get a feel for their expertise and what they want to do. And I sometimes have like a 5-minute little spiel of like, these are all the things that we can do to kind of get the conversation going. But it's mostly them talking and me listening.
Great. Thanks, Pat. On to the next question. Do you maintain orientation resources for your researchers, like a GitHub site or something? Kate, do you want to take that?
Yep, I'll make the note taker's job easy by pasting in the answer that I already had prepared that included a link to the main resource that I'm pretty proud of because it was started by members of our computational community who gently and then not so gently encouraged our scientific computing staff to then invest some time and energy in it. And at this point, a large portion of the information about sort of like the technical side of computing is available there. And it's public facing, which is unusual at the Hutch because we like to keep things very closed down because of biomedical research happening. That's the culture on our campus. But the resource that I've linked there has a lot of information about there's a quick start guide for folks, and that was directly requested by one of our faculty members in our computational biology department, who was like, can we just have a page that has these list of things about how we do things here? And so we can send people with a lot of experience there. If they have less experience, then we tend to send them to some of the overview pages that provide a lot of sort of like reference and synthesis and information about how things connect together. And we get a pretty decent number of page views through there and a lot of good responses. So as long as people know that it exists, then it tends to go pretty well for us.
That's great. That's such a great resource. Asya, how about you?
Yes, because I could not figure out a formal method of introducing myself to people that may not know, I went all out, and there's an official website at hpc.pomona.edu. The pandemic prevented me from updating it. I really should spend some time on adding the things that developed since last year. But that's the main resource, and it works. They do email the group account. We have a group account, its@hpc.pomona.edu, and that goes to me and a couple of other people that can be my backup. and I'm trying to promote science gateways, or rather web-based access points that make it easier for them, because there's no way I gave up on teaching them command line. And I find that giving them a web-based resource makes adoption easier. So we're using WebMO in computational chemistry, for instance, and word of mouth spreads, and then people come, and we have now 200 students on that platform. RStudio is another entry into knowing what resources there are. It can submit to HPC. It interfaces with Tableau. It's used in the classroom. I sometimes support teaching needs. I try to go to the meetings where there are discussions about teaching, and the component of parallelization of the code enters. We also have a GitHub repo. It's private, and even though we don't have biomedical research, we also opted on the side of caution. So you only get it with a link and a subscription. Yeah, and the GitLab is another one that we're using, but that's specifically for computer science. So whenever there's a static resource that I can put more information in, I try to do that, because they do use it and they do find it.
Great, thank you. Pat, would you mind if we had you do this one as a written?
Yeah, got it.
Okay, perfect, thank you. Sorry to do that to you at the last minute. I'm gonna try to get through as many questions as possible. This has been, it's a good resource, and we're getting a lot of good comments, but I'd like to see if we can get through a couple more questions. What are the particular challenges of orienting new users on your campus or at your institution for the resources you represent? Kate, do you want to take that?
Sure. I can also, again, throw the quick note version into the notes. We tend to have a fairly rigidly constrained campus, with folks almost encouraged to stay within their silos. And so that has caused quite a lot of difficulties, because we do have this drift of certain groups do things certain ways, and sort of getting some consolidation has been harder. We also can't really do orientation tied to an academic year, because we do have people coming in all of the time. And that includes everyone from postdocs to research scientists, grad students who do rotations that causes like a lot of sort of confusing complications about access to resources, as well as interns that may be high school or undergrad coming in over the summer. On top of all of that, we have multiple groups sort of involved in supporting this research, and we're only recently finding traction to support all of us working together to make sort of a more cohesive and synthetic image of what that support looks like.
Great, thanks, Kate. Asya?
So I've been trying to find, I'm hearing that a lot of people have this problem, so I kind of feel good that I'm not the only one struggling. I've been trying to find some sort of formal way of interfacing with researchers, but unfortunately it happens largely by word of mouth. And sometimes I get asked to interview incoming faculty, and that's how I know that they're coming in, because they want to impress them with what kind of resources we have, and that we can support them with our storage and our on-premises computing and burst to the cloud. And that way I learn in advance about their data sets and where they are, and that we have to move them. But unfortunately, the biggest challenge is that this is always so last minute. Very rarely I get advance notice of when something is happening, and we're actively working on it and trying to figure out a way to work with them. And another challenge is that IT spent money on HPC. Faculty funds were not involved at all. We were hoping that we would come up with some sort of matching program, either startup funds, which are usually pretty small, or some sort of planning together when they apply for grants, so that computational resources and storage resources are included. And that's my biggest struggle right now. And my bosses struggle as well to figure out a way to work with them to fund the development, because we bought the resources 3 years ago, and ideally I'd like to add more and grow. We are over provisioned. We are at peak almost all the time. So that's my biggest challenge right now.
Great, thank you. Paul, do you want to?
It's probably the same problem that everyone has. There's not enough of us to go around. Essentially, it's me and one other guy, and the research computing is only a portion of our job. You know, I also support the stuff within the building, you know, helping instruments talk to the computer. Yesterday, we were trying to fix the toxic gas detection system, which scares me that I'm involved with that at all. But it seems, I mean, it's always hard to get money at any university, especially state university, but a lot of times for some business process, you know, you need to replace the payroll system or whatever it is. That's sort of a chunk of FTE they can carve out for it. But it's fairly difficult to provide support for this nebulous research. And even then you're teaching the students, so it's part of the teaching mission as well. So that'd be my biggest thing that's hard, that it's just, I feel like we could do so much more for the people, but there's just not enough of us to go around.
Good point. Scott, how about with you?
I think our challenge is orienting new faculty to the opportunities that the Canadian environment presents to them, that they can actually, if their needs are immodest and they need a lot of resources, that they are able to write grants to contribute nodes to the national clusters or cloud or storage or whatever it might be. And so long as those are identical to the nodes that are on there containing, you know, CPU and GPU and memory and all of that, that they can then burst beyond their needs to that 95th percentile need. And so ensuring that I get in front of them while they have startup monies, and then they're beginning to develop the habits of being a Canadian researcher, I can actually get them going faster. And given that they only have 6 years to get tenure, they could actually make a lot more progress than a colleague who thinks that shoving something under the desk in the lab and only meeting that, you know, median need. So getting out in front of those researchers. We don't have as much of a problem getting out in front of students, frankly, and getting them used to how to work in that shared environment. You know, I have 4 staff members, but I have 190 odd other people that we can call on to support users. So it's a collaborative environment.
Nice, nice. So how do you evaluate the success of your orientation efforts? Pat, let's start with you, because Kate has dropped her answer in, and we'll have her answer if we have some time.
Yeah, you know, we're a NSF sponsored center, you know, grant. So we are, all of our participants are used to being assessed all the time, and surveys are a, you know, fact of life for us. So it's pretty easy for me to, you know, give a survey at the end of our orientation, ask a couple pointed questions, get a sense of like what was useful, what they want more information on. And I use it to kind of tweak the orientation, and also it gives me an idea of what follow-on kind of trainings to provide, what, you know, whether people are using Git or they're using our server. I can kind of get a sense for that. And so that's been pretty easy. And I definitely look at those and use them all the time.
Great, thank you. And this is great. The panelists are starting to answer the upcoming questions, because I know we're going to run out of time. So let's see. Actually, let's jump down. Sorry to do this to you guys, but let's jump down to, do you partner with other organizations at your institution to provide the orientations, library, cluster providers, other folks? Let's see. Scott, do you want to, Scott,
Sure.
you talked about collaboration.
Yeah, so if somebody could type along. When we offer our 3 times a year training in person pre-COVID, we actually had one session that was basically a research marketplace. So what we did was we collected people from other research service offices across the university, research services, research facilitators, research ethics, people that were specific to arts, science. We had one guy in from engineering once, and we had data librarians, and we had all of these people in one room. And so researchers, and it was typically those new graduate students, and especially new postdocs, would come in and go, I have a question on how to do this aspect of my research. And there was going to be somebody in that room that could help them with that question. We have not been able to reproduce that in the digital environment, but as soon as we're back on campus, we will restart those particular things. what we characterize that as is basically a hallway with a door off of it for each one of those units, like a virtualized hallway. And the best part of it was when these people weren't talking to students or postdocs, they were talking to each other. And given that it's a university of 40,000 students, not all these people always knew each other. And so they were beginning that 3 times a year familiarization with the people in those other offices.
Great, thanks. I want to move
We
on.
also, one last thing, we also cross advertise. So when the librarians are doing their data management week, we advertise that. When we're doing our research computing boot camps 3 times a year, they advertise that so that it gets seen on more websites internal to the university.
Great.
Thanks.
That's excellent. Thanks for that.
Claire, can I add something really quick?
Absolutely. Please do.
We kind of have a unique situation because we have 7 colleges on campus. There are 2 graduate schools and 5 undergraduate schools. And there is a consortium that manages some services for all of the schools. And there's a library that is a central resource. And there's a center for teaching and learning. So during the pandemic, all of this collaboration has actually gotten a lot better because we were able to meet better online for some reason, more time, no travel. So we have a data science committee because with all the changes and how data science is perceived, the colleges were forced to think how they want to deal with it, majors, minors, sequences, modules, etc. There was this large discussion. And a lot of these people, when they come with data science questions, like where do you get a data set? How do you clean a data set? They come to the library and the library sends them to respective colleges. There's also a lot of collaboration between colleges. Students can take courses pretty much across all undergraduate schools. And that's also where we get some cross feed. And we also have a GIS mailing list across colleges. So all the GIS information is shared across the schools. And that's how we get more information about what's happening.
Nice. That's great. A lot of great ideas there. I want to skip down to what worked for you and what did not work. And what would you recommend other folks to follow and what to avoid? Kate, do you want to take that?
Sure. I can, even though everybody on our campus is ostensibly working on biomedical research, they are very much interested in only the information relevant to them. So that means that trying to have a one-size-fits-all, even orientation is not going to be super effective. And that is based on sort of the level of training that a person has, what information is relevant to them, as well as what their specific job role is. And so having a variety of information, and especially like our campus likes having a person that you can go talk to learn something, and then they can customize the answer for you. And that ends up being what works well for us. So it's really a function of what our sort of support culture is and how it is that we can sort of match make that with available resources, both people-wise and online. And we're continuing to explore this sort of like developing custom approaches for different groups.
Great. Hey, Pat, do you want to answer the question, any improvement plans for the future? Sorry, I threw that
unmute. Well, you know, not too specifically. We are in the process of applying for our next 5-year grant cycle, and you know, there's definitely things I can take away. Like one of the things I put down and written before. You know, we operate on a 5-year grant cycle, so our orientation really picks up like for a year or 2 or 5 years, and then the staff are the same. So in terms of improvements, I think that we've learned a lot from this orientation last time around, and we can adjust that a bit. But nothing discrete at this point.
Okay, Scott, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, as I mentioned right before we all got started, we're in the midst of a $170 million shrink of the university budget across a 3-year time frame, and I'm not wasting a good crisis. So unlike the other schools that may always find money to put into administrative systems, what we've discovered is they're trying to wring people out of those and put them into software-based workflows. So they're freeing up some staff positions, although shrinking by over 1,000 people total. But I'm actually gaining a couple of positions, and in a team of 4, 2 positions is a lot. We may be up to 16 after about 3 years. And so the very first 2 positions that I've been granted by this reorganization, one was developing communities of interest coordinator. And so this is going to be someone who goes out and builds communities of interest, either field-based, everybody in the digital humanities, or tool-based, Python, R, whatever it might be, and hope to create those communities where they become self-sustaining, and the graduate students and postdocs refer to each other in looking how to best get started and continue to do things. And then we step back to be more training. The other one will be grants advising. It's grant season right now, and I've got 3 of them open right now with faculty members from business, computing science, engineering, and medicine. So we have a medical school and an engineering school. So it's quite a handful, and that's something I would like to hand off to someone. But because I've been here for a quarter century, you know, I can help get them started at least. But that helps orient people to making grant writing simpler. And I actually have gotten people act surprised that there's someone available to help them write technobabble into their grant, so that when someone reviews it, they go, oh, that's logical technobabble. He actually has someone working with him on that. It's not just, you know, technical terms that they don't understand as a researcher in medicine when they're trying to apply machine learning to their field and things like that.
Right, great. Thank you so much, all of you, all of our panelists. I'd like a big round of applause for our panelists. I know that this was fast. We could talk about this probably for days. It's nice for everybody to get some new ideas, get some confirmation on some of the stuff that they're already doing. Any last words from our panelists in like a 30-second? Are we, if you want
really
to
quickly, I would not have been part of this community had it not been for COVID.
Wow.
So there are tiny silver linings even to the darkest of clouds.
I think that's a pretty big silver lining, actually. This is a great community, and we're happy you're here.
And that's a great spot, silver linings. It's a great spot to wind it up. So thanks for coming today, everybody. If you haven't signed in yet, there's still an opportunity to do that. The link's in the chat. Just a reminder that this call was recorded and the recording will be up soon. You'll be getting an email about that. Today's topic was all about orienting researchers to research computing and data resources. A very big special thanks to our presenters. We had Patrick Clemins from the University of Vermont, Scott Dellinger of University of Alberta, Kate Hertweck from the Fred Hutchinson Cancer Research Center, Asya Shklyar of Pomona College, and Paul Weakliem of UC Santa Barbara. Our next call is going to be on April 8th. You may have seen in the chat that the CASC ROI survey has been extended till Tuesday, March 16th. So you can either get the link from the chat or it's in the top of the call doc. And also a quick reminder that PERC 21 deadlines are coming up. The short paper submissions are due on April 13th. Panels and birds of a feather May 9th, and posters on May 16th. All right, so I just want to thank the people who worked on the call. That's Claire, Christina, Wirwan, Martin, Annalie, Amy, Katya, Bob, and I'm Jana. Thanks again for coming, and we'll see you in April.
Thanks, Claire, for moderating and getting all the speakers organized, and for all our speakers.
Thank you.
Really
Thank you
great
so
to hear all
much.
your perspectives.
Yeah.
Thank
Very
you to
grateful.
people participating in mad typing.
Yes, thank you to Christina.
Yeah, score.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. It was a great
It was
session.
interesting to hear all that.
Take care, everybody.